All right, fantastic. All right, well, welcome, and let's begin with a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, we praise you today, God. We're continuing along this journey in the book of origins, and Lord, I'm asking for your blessing as we open up your word, that you would give us insight for living and understanding of the broad themes of how you love us in Christ, specifically in terms of understanding that overarching covenant of grace that you have revealed to us through the personal connection that we have through the church in Jesus, and that you've shown us in the Bible. And God, we praise you for sacred scripture, and we ask that you would help us not so much to idolize it as though it is an object of worship, but to understand that it is a deeply significant primary means of gaining access to the true object of worship, which is our adoration in the direction of you, the lover of our souls, even as you save us in Jesus Christ, purely because of grace through faith, and empower us with your spirit within us. So we praise you, God, today, even as we pray these things, asking for your blessing in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, so we're going to open up to Genesis chapter 23. If you want to open up your Bible there, like I just said, Genesis 23 and 24, I just want to kind of do a treetop view through them, but if you take a look at your handout, we're going to follow right along that handout, and it also seems to rather fairly quickly want to get us into chapter 26. But to understand 26, we at least need an understanding of 23 and 24. 24 is a really interesting chapter that has some, let's say, some beautiful aspects to it. The relationship between Isaac and Rebekah begins there in chapter 24. I'd like to spend more time in it, but I think for the purposes of the general sort of goals of this Bible study, we won't spend a ton of time there. But if you just want some really interesting reading, read Genesis chapter 24. If you want, it's kind of an interesting, love story with Isaac and Rebekah. There's some really fascinating parts to it. But we're going to just sort of skim over it today. But let's take a look. If you take a look at your handout on page 1, it says this: in this section, the torch of God's promise is passed from Abraham to Isaac. Remember, time and again in the Bible, God is referred to either as Yahweh or who? The God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And as to denote him, because they were leaders. Absolutely. And because when we look in the record of Genesis, Abraham is the first person that we see hearing directly from God. So then they're the let's say the carriers of the covenant is essentially. And so which also just lends more understanding to that idea that big covenant of grace begins there with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And then Jacob, later we're going to see he changes his name, of course. God changes his name to Israel, and he becomes the father of the Israelites, and it quite literally becomes the father of the 12 tribes. And we'll see if we get that far today, but definitely we're going to touch on those things. In the closing days of Abraham's life, Sarah dies. Remember his wife Sarai, whose name was changed to Sarah, just as his was changed to Abraham from Abram, turns his attention to finding a wife for his son Isaac. This is interesting, telling of some of the historical ways, and also reminding young men that it's okay for their parents to try to arrange their future marriages, right? That also reminds us of that. There's biblical precedence for parents to try to find the wives for their sons.
How old was Sarah?
That was deeply personal right there. What?
How old was Sarah?
So, you know what, we're going to see it. I think it says 123. It's in this 127. Yeah, you're creeping up on her. And so the story of Abraham continues in the account of Isaac and the birth of his sons, Esau and Jacob. God's promises are reiterated to Isaac and the birth of his sons, Esau and Jacob. I just read that again. God's promises are reiterated to Isaac just as they were previously to Abraham. Isaac not only receives the promise of God to Abraham, but also inherits some of the same foibles, as we will see. Remember, the book of Genesis, if it does nothing else, is it rings true because we see how imperfect people are, even by our own experience. And here it is in the Bible. It's one of the important aspects that help us to know the Bible is reliable, because the biblical record doesn't, if you were going to make something up, you wouldn't include things that made you look bad. But the writers of the Bible, time and again, including in the New Testament, we see all number of things, all kinds of manner of things, where details that would have been left out if you were just trying to make a fanciful record of yourself, you wouldn't include some of these things. In this section, we want to focus on how the promises to Abraham are passed down to the next generation. God is preserving an offspring reminiscent of Genesis chapter 3 and verse 15, where the Bible says, I will put enmity between you and the woman, when God is talking to the devil after tempting Adam and Eve, and she falls into sin. Her husband follows and leads them, in a sense, leads all of humanity into sin because of this temptation. He shall bruise your head and you shall bruise his heel. So remember that. Genesis 3:15, right there is the foundation or the fountain of the covenant. Right away, God, not caught by surprise, says, okay, man fell into sin. I allowed it so Christ could be glorified at the cross, and I'm going to capture for myself or secure for myself a covenant people to worship me, that I can live in perfect relationship with them. And we find that right in the Bible. So the simplicity of the gospel message in the New Testament, hey, believe on Jesus and you'll be saved, goes all the way back to the fountain of the covenant, which is Genesis chapter 3 and verse 15. At the twilight of Abraham's life, he passes down the torch of his faith to Isaac. Okay, so we're going to read through, as this says, read through the text for the entire study. I'm just going to highlight. I'm going to read those first two chapters, just a couple. We're just going to highlight what they mean. Then because I don't know, frankly, if we followed this Bible study exactly how it's written, I don't know how many hours long they would expect these Bible studies to be. So that's why I'm trying to just kind of zero in on the key themes. Then interact with the following questions and record your notes if you'd like to on them concerning this section in Genesis. Again, that's why for our next Bible study, I want to make sure you have the entire book ahead of time. So if you want to do on your own and go through, it'll probably add a little more depth for those who want to do that. Let's see. Okay. Passing the torch by preserving the line. You see that heading? Genesis 23 and 24. So again, kind of just an overview. It's the picture of transition. Chapter 23 captures the scene of Sarah's death. So I'm going to open up Genesis chapter 23 and just go through it in an overview fashion. So Genesis chapter 23, Sarah had lived, there you go, 127 years. So just shy, almost where Pat feels like she's at. So let's see. I want to share my screen to you all up there. Where's the share screen thing at when you're on here? Aha, the green button. That's what I'm after. All right, let's see. All right, optimize for the video. Okay. Did that do it? Oh, but it did work. Oh, but you don't have to do the optimize. I like optimal things. I optimize. Okay. So here is Genesis 23. Sarah lived 127 years. These were the years of the life of Sarah. Okay. Sarah died. This whole thing, Abraham loses his wife and he begins to mourn. You see right here, Abraham went in to mourn and to weep for her. And Abraham rose up from before his dead and said to the Hittites. So he has this whole conversation with another tribe nearby with the Hittites. And what does he say to them? He wants a place to bury his wife. And interestingly, he says that I may bury my dead. I find that pretty interesting, although I don't know to say that there is any particular theological significance to that. I just find that kind of compelling, that I may bury my dead out of my sight. So good question. I don't know exactly why. But I suspect that it at least points to us to some ancient, let's say, cultural context, right? He must not have wanted to bury his wife and be constantly reminded of her death in his own sight. So he wants to go to another area and he asks permission. Again, I don't know why. I don't know if there's any like theological significance to that. Just on a personal level, I found that kind of interesting. You know, there is that conversation that people have, like if somebody I love died, you know, could you stay, if you lose your wife or your husband, do you stay in the same house? You know, I just found that deeply, let's say, telling of the human condition as being the same today as it was in, you know, several hundred, even millennia ago.
Could it be because he knew that was just just her body that was not her.
Yeah,
Her
perhaps.
soul was gone, so there's no need to have it close by.
Perhaps. I mean, because think about the practical implications of some of that. Again, this is just a footnote, something I found interesting. Think about the practical implications of that. How many people is it that, mom dies, or one that Christina and I can think of, a couple of people we've known where they lose a child and then they bury the child in the family cemetery in the hometown and then feel like they can't move anywhere. They can't go anywhere. And I think that's one of the reasons that I find it interesting is what you just said, the practical implications. Look, people have been struggling with these same things from the beginning of time, right back into Genesis. He says, look, this is what it seems like. I just did a little research. It just seems like it was culturally appropriate for him to bury her somewhere nearby, but he doesn't want to do that. Maybe he doesn't want to be reminded every day. Maybe he does have a deep sense that that's just the body and he doesn't want to focus on that too much.
Maybe he doesn't want us to pay homage to human beings.
Yeah,
But to him.
Absolutely. So there's another thing, right? You can almost make of a burial site, if you're not careful, you can make it a shrine. Right. You can make it almost like the pagans do, we would say, if we start reading Corinthians and New Testament passages and the Old Testament. We have to be careful not to adopt pagan practices like that. Worship of the dead becomes something that is very easy. I think I mentioned Sunday the phrase functionally agnostic. And I think it's something that a lot of Christians fall into, where it's like, you have a little bit of faith in God. Maybe it's even central to you, but you can become functionally like someone who lives as an agnostic and adopt a lot of pagan spiritual practices if you're not careful. And like Christina, when I first met her and we started having conversations about family and all that kind of stuff, it was like, I didn't understand why. In fact, I think we may have even kind of like argued about it, not like fight about it, but like kind of disagreed, where she would say, I don't want to be buried, and have a typical like big gravestone and all that, because I don't want people to feel like our kids, grandkids, I don't want them to feel like they're obligated to go to that place. And for me, it was tough because I was like, I don't know, if I ever accomplish anything in ministry, I want a giant statue to my humility with holding a big giant Bible and like this, and I'm like, I don't know. I mean, like I've found it interesting as someone who cares a little bit about genealogy, not a ton, but a little bit, to go see some gravestones of ancestors, and I find that kind of interesting. So her interest, and I've adopted it, is since we both have access to it as Marine Corps veterans, to be, in what do you call it? It's not entombed, cremated, and then there's like, big things at like Arlington National Cemetery. We don't have the service record to qualify for a big burial anyway, but they have little plaques, and it goes into just a little vault, and it's like, there you go. There's Corporal Christina and Staff Sergeant Chris. Well, and then if somebody wants to go see that, well, there's a record of it. And then if they do that, like my thought is, okay, they get to go see Arlington and get a bigger, there's something, yeah, go ahead.
What we did was, we went to get our funeral plan, and I said, no, I need a 110 outlet here by the crypt. And yeah, what do you want that for? I said, my kids are gonna come see me once a month. And he said, that'll never happen. I said, that's how they're getting their hair, it's $3,000 a month. They'll be there.
That's funny. Yeah, that's funny.
Slide one in next to the other. He said, no, I'm going feet first when I go.
Oh God, that's funny.
I don't care what they do.
One thing too, I
That's
think
funny.
this chapter talks about too is it shows, like, you see businessmen use this chapter to show his character, that Abraham had all the money, he didn't negotiate. He did this in the public. It even talks in this chapter about how the negotiations were done at the gate, like a public transaction. His integrity was there. So I always
absolutely.
that interesting of him, like that business side, like in his personal family dealings, even he was above reproach with how he handled everything.
Yeah, so we that's excellent too. So there's a very practical application. The father of our faith wants a place, he wants to purchase a burial plot. That's essentially what he's doing, something like we do today. So he goes to the Hittites, and then he's negotiating with them. Okay, like here's verse 23. He says, I'm a sojourner and a foreigner among you. Give me property among you for a burying place, that I might bury my dead out of my sight. So he wants to go and do it somewhere else. perhaps for any combination of or any number of these potential reasons. So they answered him, hear us, you are a prince of God among us. They're like, hey, you're an important guy. They recognize the importance of him. He had a big family, tribe, he had, cattle, wealth. And so they recognize that from him. And then they give him the place that he asked for. He asked for a place. Let's see which verse he asked. Yeah, Abraham rose. That's what Christina's talking about. Abraham rose and bowed to the Hittites, the people of the land. So he showed respect. And then in his interaction and dealing with them and gratitude. And then he asked for the place where there was a cave in a field. Here it is, verse 29. They may give me the cave of, you guys love it when I ask you to do readings at Christmas and the words look like this, don't you? Of Machpelah, I guess, Machpelah, probably something closer to that, which he owns. It's at the end of the field for the full price. Let him give it to me in your presence as property for a burying place. So he says, I'll pay what you ask. I'll give the full price. So he again, fair business dealings. Again, like passages like this, even though like for me, it's easy for me when I look at a passage like this, I don't see like huge theological significance, right? But it's like, wait a second, if God gave us the record of the Bible, I bet there's something significant in every verse, right? So it's like there's a lot of practical value in some of these things. So
Why did you want a cave?
I don't know. That's probably just custom. It was common to do that. Maybe, in fact, if you think this is very ancient times, so this is perhaps 2000 BC, I want to say. So perhaps like, think about like a person of means today will often have a crypt constructed, right? I mean, that's like one of the most expensive ways to do a burial is an above ground crypt, And so I suspect that probably it was like, okay, we want a really good resting place for her. She's a very important person. So a cave could provide that. And probably, perhaps, I've seen in Jerusalem where a lot of the crypts for like Zechariah's crypt, I think it's Zechariah, some of the prophets are buried in Jerusalem in a place you can see from the Temple Mount, and some of the kings are buried there of Israel, and you can see that what it looks like they did is use a cave and then close in the front of it with a heavy stone, or some kind of ancient cement work so you start off with a crypt, and then that's probably something like. I'd have to do more research to know. I don't know if this is let's say a space or a location that any like modern archaeology. I don't know that. It could be. I'm not familiar with it.
Pastor?
Yes, sir. Go ahead, Bruce.
When we took our trip to Israel, we visited Hebron, and there's a big shrine there now. Abraham's buried there also. I think I have some brochures on it. When I get back, I'll see if I can locate them.
I would love to see that. That's fantastic. That's excellent. My trip to Israel, that was one of the scenes, one of the places we did not go. So that's excellent, Bruce. Here we go. So verse 13, and he said to Ephron in the hearing of the people of the land, what Christina was saying. So he said it in front of people. They're meeting in a public place. But if you will hear me, I give you the price of the field. Accept it from me that I might bury my dead there. Absolutely.
And then they go on to talk. They go back and forth. It tells them.
Yep. Here's the price. The piece of land worth 400 shekels of silver, which would have been a ton of money.
The church in Cologne, where the three wise men supposedly are there, and their coffins there, and all.
Really? Some of that stuff, like modern archaeology, we've talked about a little bit in here, has really done some fascinating work to confirm the biblical record. Then church tradition has done a lot to cloud it. So some places, it's just a tradition. We don't know where it comes from, kind of like the Church of the Holy Sepulchre or then the Garden Tomb. We're not certain which or if one of those is exactly right, where Jesus was crucified and buried. I believe the weight of evidence is on the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. But they're both within several hundred yards of each other. When you're there, it's like you're definitely in the place where this happened. You're not certain exactly which, although I'm rather confident the Church of the Holy Sepulchre is the right place. And but anyway, so some of those things are like, like they say, if you took all of the scraps, all of the pieces of wood that are enshrined as having been pieces of the cross that are found in every Catholic church around the world, you could build the ark. They say you could build the ark. It's like, so, okay. So is any of that wood from the actual cross? Who knows? Maybe, but that's not really the point of that, is it? Unless you think wrongly about, let's call it venerated objects, unless you think wrongly about that and you think there's relics, so there's a big difference, isn't there, between a holy relic and a historical artifact, right? A historical artifact helps me to confirm my faith. A holy relic may take away my we were just talking about Sunday, worship the right things. It's like, be careful if some of the places, like maybe the wise men are buried there, maybe not, but at minimum, the fact that people say they are confirms or gives that they existed. It gives weight to the testimony of the record of the church. That somebody would even care to think about that is valuable.
And I haven't visited the Ark in Kentucky. Well worth a visit.
Yeah, for sure. One of these days we're going to go to the Ark. Okay, so that's chapter 23. The field and the cave that is in it were made over to Abraham, verse 20, as property for a burying place by the Hittites. So that's fantastic, and I look forward to, if you can find that stuff, Bruce, I look forward to seeing it. I'll do some I can do some Googling on that too and see some pictures. That's fantastic. Okay, so now let's open back up. So this is the digital version of what you're looking at in front of you. That's all this is. If you're seeing it as I share the screen, this is where the Bible study comes from, is from my Logos Bible library, where I have an absurd collection of books. Okay, so there's verse 23, captures the scene of Sarah's death. That's what we just highlighted. Chapter 24 opens with Abraham aging. Now, Abraham was old, well advanced in years, and the Lord had blessed him in all things. Okay, so we'll look at Genesis 24. He wants his son not to marry a Canaanite, but a woman from his own country. Because you see, Sebastian and Ephraim, parents often know what's better for you. Okay, and so why is the matter of a wife for Isaac such a matter of grave concern for Abraham? So let's take a quick look at Genesis 24. Right. Right. Absolutely. I think so. And the covenant, right? And there's an image I'm going to show you just in a second that helps us to see this. So again, I don't even want to go through all of this. But I think it's a beautiful love story. It's there's some tricky stuff. Like, let's see, the brother, it's a complex story a bit of how Isaac and Rebekah came together. I'll just read a couple of verses to give you an idea. Now, Abraham was old, well advanced in years. He said to his servant, the oldest of his household, who had charge of all that he had, put your hand under my thigh, that I may make you swear by the Lord. So some kind of a gesture that when people would make an oath. The God of heaven and God of earth, that you will not take a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites among whom I dwell. So he's making his manager, his right-hand man, he's making him swear an oath to him, probably because he knows he's near death. Don't you let him marry one of those Canaanites, and why? So it's probably not just personal preference, but because, like what you just said, I'll show you a little picture in a second, a little image of this, because Abraham has learned the hard way, hasn't he, by this point, to listen to God when it comes to the promise and the blessing that's supposed to come through his family. And I think if we look back, there's even some instruction for them not to take the wives from the Canaanites.
Yeah, if you read the Deuteronomy cross-reference.
Yeah, here it is. Here it is. There it is, right there. So this is going to come later in the record of Scripture. You shall not intermarry with them. Remember, because they're commanded to go and to occupy. And it's even one of the more controversial aspects of the Old Testament, where we see God commanding the Israelites to conquer, to occupy, right? But then later we see Jesus coming and conquering and occupying through sacrifice and through love. So it's like there's not two gods. This is one of the outworking of God. And then we see the ultimate fulfillment of God's character in Jesus. Yeah, don't intermarry with them, giving your daughters and their sons. For they would turn your sons away from following me to serve other gods. Again, such a practical implication there. Got to be very careful. I know someone who was a Christian, raised that way, seemingly genuinely believed on the Lord, and for matters of practicality, let's say, wants or wanted to marry a guy from a devout Muslim family who claimed, well, I'm not really Muslim, I just practice it for my mom's sake. Well, this is very troubling. A lot of people who know Muslim families very well know that a lot of young men are not very devout in their faith. They're just going to practice it a little bit for their mom's sake. But then once they get married and start to have kids, if he will do that for his mom's sake, guess what else he'll do for his mom's sake? Mom now wants those kids raised as she sees fit. And so very careful. This is, I mean, there's so much practical application for this. It's like, is it okay for me to marry someone who's an unbeliever? Well, we can turn to the New Testament. Don't be unequally yoked. Why? Because chances are in a relationship, especially if you genuinely learn, you know, fall in love with that woman and you're a believer and she's not. Well, it may only be a matter of time before your interest in preserving your relationship with her will outweigh your interest in preserving your relationship with God. Because it's like, you know, like what's the old saying? You know, he knows who he has to go home to, that kind of thing. It's like, you know, go ahead.
Well, you know, it's almost like human nature when you have people that use alcoholic, you throw the alcohol and not. If there's a drug issue, you have your own route that you go if you want to stay on the right narrow path. It's the same thing with human nature. You're saying is Father worried about a son by having that son with a group of people that believe in God and his and his, you know, and again, this covenant to maintain that, you have to be in a community of
Right.
like-minded people.
That's right. That's right. Yeah,
So-
exactly. It's different, but yeah, if you're not in, you know, it seems like Christina and I would say, her memory is so much better than mine. It seems like recently we just were talking about, we know someone or something came up. I can't remember the conversation, something you were telling me about, where someone said in that relationship early, I can't think of what it was. I don't know, who knows, but it was something like that. It's like, you know, yeah. So after the first date, you might not want to go on the second date if you've already discovered that this is not going to be the right path, because the further in we go, it's like a bear trap. The further in we go, now you start rationalizing, you start seeing it, you know, you think, oh, well, I could probably lead this, you know, angry atheist to Jesus if I just marry her. It's like,
What you see is what you feel.
yeah, you better not assume you're changing anybody, right? Because I mean, the only person we can really control and change is ourselves. And even that is not always entirely possible.
Well, and this is like, to me, this part of scripture is so important too, because it's often misused if you don't understand it. It's used to justify racism, and it can be horribly misapplied if you don't understand that the reason why he was saying not to marry in the different contexts was to preserve the relationship with God,
Right.
not because they were whatever. It was because those places were to be totally destroyed in God's plan. And so, unfortunately, that's one of the scriptures that had context for marriage.
That's right. That's an important point too. Yeah, there's a lot of, yes. Where is that noise coming from? I don't think that's Bruce. Hey, Sandy, do you want to, can you pause or turn off your microphone for a second? I think there's a bunch of static coming from it.
Oh, really? Okay, let me find it.
Oh, no worries. I think. Oh yeah, I guess I could mute you, but see, I try to be polite and ask people to mute themselves. There you go. If you managed to do it, Sandy, I think that did it. Sometime, and then if you want to say something, just turn it back on and then say something. Okay, so yeah, absolutely. This could be among those passages of scripture that we might call twisted scripture. There are a lot of passages, especially Old Testament passages like this, that, for example, were used to justify African slavery in America. A lot of really, really twisted passages of scripture. For example, things like, Paul tells in some of his letters, he tells servants to obey their masters. But he didn't say, God says it's good for someone to be the master of another person. That isn't what was said. He's speaking into the real context at that moment. So we've got to, this is another important basic concept of Bible hermeneutics or Bible exposition, is that there's a big difference between, I say it all the time, description and prescription. Big difference. It's like, hey, you have cancer on your toe, right? You have that. That's a lot different than saying it's really good to have cancer on your toe. Like which I don't know if people get cancer on their toe, but that's whatever. Like there's a big difference between describing something and prescribing something. Big difference.
But mankind always twists things to his own.
100%, right? Like that, right? It's like ne'er a truer word was spoken about the Bible. People often twist scripture to serve themselves. So then later on, so we can see that's probably the central theological significant theme in Genesis 24. Abraham wants to preserve the line of the covenant. He wants to obey God, and so that's what he's saying. So we can't get that twisted. And then we see the whole interaction of kind of the courting, the meeting. Genesis 24:16. The young woman was very attractive in appearance, a maiden whom no man had known. She went down to the spring and filled her jar and came up. Verse 27. The servant ran to meet her and said, "Please give me a little water to drink from the jar." She said, "Drink, my lord." So a part of their introduction and courting. He's thirsty. She gives him something cold to drink. It's like I think it's kind of an interesting thing. So she quickly emptied her jar and ran again to the well, and she did it again.
Did we skip something?
We did. We skipped. So the rest of this chapter is Isaac meeting Rebekah. Yeah, we definitely skipped it. I just want to kind of skim that to start getting to the next chapter. So that's where they meet. That's where Isaac and Rebekah meet and begin to court. And then by the end of this chapter, let's see, verse 27. By verse 27, 29, by the end of the chapter, she comes back with him. So he goes and it's such a long chapter. We'll be here the rest. We'll finish just to read that whole thing. But the point is, this is the courting, the meeting where they meet Isaac and Rebekah. Now take a look at this. We're going to move to Genesis 25. Let me find this. Here it is, right here. Is it up on your screen? Okay, so take a look at this. Notice this. This is coming from a great commentary that I use sometimes. Sometimes I've even just used this commentary as the basis of Bible studies, the teacher's commentary. So take note. Up on your screen, you'll see this pointer. So beginning with Abraham, right? 2000 BC-ish. That's probably his life right there. Something in that in that range. So Abraham receives the promise of the covenant. God begins to speak to him. Now he's going to fulfill the promises that begin in Genesis 3:15. And then notice Abraham has the two sons, Isaac and Ishmael. Notice the line of the covenant. This is very important. The line of the covenant. Abraham, he took matters into his own hands, or his wife really, and then tells him, "Hey, I don't think God's ever going to fulfill this. I'm never going to have a baby. I'm too old. So you impregnate my servant and Haggai, and then he has the son Ishmael." Well, that wasn't God's will. They had gone astray. So then later, though, she begins to laugh, and she names him Isaac. This is the baby who makes her laugh or gives her joy because she never thought this was going to be possible. So then through that line now, Isaac. Now from Isaac, we'll notice this is the line of the covenant, and the covenant is so essential. This promise of to Abraham to make his descendants like the stars, and through him all the nations will be blessed, and that's speaking of Jesus, and we're the spiritual fulfillment of that. Now Isaac has these twins through Rebekah, Jacob and Esau, and notice God's will, and we're going to start to look at chapter 25, and then I'm sure we won't finish it, and that'll be what we're looking at all next week. He has these two twins, Jacob and Esau, and then it's through Jacob.
Is that because he was born first?
So interestingly enough, he wasn't born first. So that's
Why
what.
did he choose Jacob?
Well, we'll read it. We'll get it right into it. So, in fact, it's fascinating that God would choose. In fact, I'd say that his choice of Jacob is an example that fulfills, or is a type of where time and again we see in the Bible God making a choice that is not the obvious choice, because he was born second, and Esau was actually a powerful, rugged, man, whereas Jacob was a little bit weaselly in how he even inherited the birthright, which we'll look at. So then through Jacob, we end up with the 12 tribes of Israel. And again, we see an example. Notice there are 12 tribes, not because Jacob had 12 sons, but because his son Joseph has 2 sons. And because of all that transpired that we'll look at later in Joseph's life, where his sons tried to get rid of him and sold him off as a slave in Egypt, you end up with Joseph's sons because Joseph inherits a double portion of the inheritance. And he was always favored by his father anyway. And he was the youngest, and his brothers despise him. So again, it's like, if there's anything that's common when it comes to God's calling that we see in the Bible, is that God almost never chooses the one we would think, like they say of not Abraham Lincoln, him too was a very tall man, but of George Washington, that he was always the tallest man in the room. So he was sure to be the leader. And that's how we think. Who's strong, who's tall, who's impressive?
Was Jacob-
Not David.
Why was Jacob's father's favorite?
Well, we'll get into it. So we see that, and you'll notice then Joseph's sons, because he receives a double portion of the blessing, he gives the blessing to Manasseh and Ephraim, after whom Ephraim is named. And interestingly enough, there was a time that the tribe of Ephraim was the biggest tribe in Israel. There were times in Old Testament days when Israel wasn't always called Israel. It was often called Ephraim, especially the northern kingdom, because it was the biggest and mightiest of the tribes, which makes Ephraim very happy because he's hoping that he grows another 3 or 4 inches before it's all said and done.
He's growing pretty fast there.
That's right. So let's get into this chapter 25. And let's see, why don't we do this? Would somebody like to let's start to read it, because we're going to finish our time out here in 25, and then next week we'll only be in 25 and talking about those very things. So let's see, would someone like to read, let's say 25, 1 through 9, something like that. Well, we need to read 25, 1 through 18. Maybe somebody would just like to read that whole thing.
Abram took another wife, whose name was Keturah. Bore him Simran, Jotham, Medan, Median, Ishbak, and Shua. Jotham was the father of Sheba and Degan. The descendants of Degan were the Asurites, the Leptusites, and the Lemnitites. The sons of Midian were Ephra, Hanok, Abida, and Alda. All these were descendants of Keturah. Abram left everything he owned to Isaac, but while he was still living, he gave gifts to the sons of his concubines and sent them away from his son Isaac to the land of the east. Although Abram lived 175 years, then Abram breathed his last and died at a good old age, an old man and full of years, and he was gathered to his people. His sons Isaac and Ishmael buried him in the cave at Machpelah, near Mamre, in the fields of Ephron, son of Zor, and Hittite. The field of Abram had brought from the Hittites. There Abram was buried with his wife Sarah. After Abram's death, God blessed his son Isaac, who then lived near Beer, Laher, and Rod. This is the account of Abram's son, Ishmael, whom Sarah made servants, the Hagar, the Egyptian, bore to Abram. There was the names of the sons of Ishmael listed in the order of their birth. These are the names of the sons of Ishmael listed in the order of their birth.
Good choice.
Lebota, the firstborn of Ishmael, Kedar, Adbeel, Nisam, Nisma, Jonah, Massa, Hada, Terma, Jeto, Nephish, and Kedema. These were the sons of Ishmael, and these are the names of the 12 tribe rulers according to their settlements and camps. Although Ishmael lived 137 years, he breathed his last and died, and he was gathered to his people. His descendants settled in the area from Avad to Sur, near the border of Egypt, and you go towards Asor, and they lived in hostility towards all their children.
How about a round of applause for reading all those names? I knew I was setting somebody up. You did excellent. Okay, so we see at the very least, let's take a look back at our handout. We read through that. Let's see. I didn't ask this question, but we definitely talked about some of it, the significance of the location of Sarah's birth. We went through some of that. Now we've started in chapter 25. So you only have to go down briefly. I'm not sure if that'll put you on the second page or not, because I'm looking at it digitally, where it says passing the torch from Abraham to Isaac. Second page. And so now we're going to get into this section. And at the very least, I think it's valuable to have read the opening part of chapter 25, because we see again, as we talked about at some length a few weeks ago, the scripture still shows great concern for Ishmael. The scripture shows the record of his people. And at the very least, that should be telling, I think, to Christians to be very mindful not to be dismissive of our Abrahamic brothers and sisters, especially those in Islam, that we should be invested to, and as the church, maybe not us individually as a church are going to have direct opportunity to do that, but when it comes to other brothers of the covenant, like Israel and those are Jewish brothers and sisters. Interestingly, I've been in touch and been talking to the people, the director of the senior center that's moving in across the street, and I had offered to do some Bible studies, and I don't know where this will lead, but I'd offered to offer some Bible studies, but they're very much, a secular, non-specific. They're not a denominational thing. It's nothing like that. And I said, well, maybe there's still something that I could offer that of a religious nature. And also I'm hoping to be able to do something, to offer something over there, like a physical fitness class using some low impact martial arts movements or something. But when it comes to like a Bible study kind of thing, one of the things that we talked about is the possibility, and if it ever happens, of course, I'll invite everybody, of maybe creating like a panel discussion where people could ask questions, and there might be myself and a Jewish rabbi and maybe a Catholic priest and who knows who else, maybe a Pentecost, like some kind of spectrum where people could ask, let's say, questions, on a given topic, like how does your religious faith inform your, your social and political identity, something like that, maybe something that people might find interesting. So we should, at least from that, be mindful to say, okay, these people came, especially, in terms of their religious identity, from the same source. And we have a lot in common. So there's a lot of places where we can start to have dialogue, because they consider themselves, in essence, the descendants of Ishmael. And so there's a lot there. Okay, and so now let's look at chapter 25, verse 19. Okay, and this is where, again, we'll finish out the study here, and then next week that'll be all that we're focused on. Passing the torch from Abraham to Isaac. A new section begins in Genesis 25:19, where it says, "These are the generations of Isaac, Abraham's son. In what ways do you see the faith of Abraham passed on to Isaac?" in verses 19 through 26, which I'm about to read. That'll be our question. "Observe, among other things, also how long it takes for Isaac to have his first son." So here's Genesis 25:19 through 26. Well, through 27, perhaps.
Does it say anywhere that his sons had daughters, or were they all boys?
Well, you know what? As we go through and read it, I think we'll see, and I'm quite confident that he had daughters, and I think that the scripture will. Now, it doesn't appear, or if they did, I don't think there's any mention Let's see. We'll see it as we read through it. It's a good question. I'm not certain. Remember, it's not that God doesn't care about women.
No, I know that, but I'm just saying, did his daughters do anything significant? Or
Right.
did they marry him?
Oh yeah, we'll see. I don't know how this story is so much about the covenant going through Abraham, Isaac,
The
and
leaders were all-
yeah. So I'm not certain. We'll see as we read through it. It's entirely possible. I'm really not positive about that. I know there's mention of their wives in it, I think. So this is the account of Abraham's son Isaac. Abraham became the father of Isaac, and Isaac was 40 years old when he married Rebekah, daughter of Bethuel, the Aramean from Padan Aram, the sister of Laban, the Aramean. I should call in Maisie as a pinch hitter to read those names. She does a better job. So notice he's 40 years old when he finally gets married. So this man is in his father's house at 40 years old. Although perhaps it's worth noting that people were regularly living well into their a century and a quarter. So maybe that's worth noting.
He was a teenager.
Yeah, exactly. He's just barely reaching adulthood. Isaac prayed to the Lord on behalf of his wife because she was barren. That is his wife Rebekah, who all of chapter 24 is how they met and how they came to be married. The Lord answered his prayer, and his wife Rebekah became pregnant. The babies jostled each other within her, and this is why she said, "What is happening to me?" So the babies were like fighting internally. They're twins. They're jostling within her. So she went to inquire of the Lord. The Lord said to her, 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 peoples from within you will be separated. One people will be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger. So here's what we see, that God is speaking to her, and the older will serve the younger. Again, like out of order. This doesn't make any sense. God is all the time choosing that which the world sees as crazy, the backwards, upside down. We're a part of what has been often called an upside down kingdom. Think of Jesus, for example. Most kings send servants out to die in battle to win victories on their behalf, but not Jesus. He goes to the cross, suffers himself to gain the victory of gathering his servants to himself in love. Upside down, topsy-turvy, backwards kingdom. Beautiful. Okay. So then the Lord said to her, 2 nations are within you, and they'll be separated. The older will serve the younger. When the time came for her to give birth, there were twin boys in her womb. The first to come out was red, and his whole body was like a hairy garment. So they named him Esau. So why did they name him Esau? Here's a little bit of background. This, if you look at the pointer on the screen, you'll see over here.
My daddy wanted me to marry him.
Oh man. So Esau is the elder. This is coming from the Lexham Bible Dictionary, which is a great source for information like this. He lived around 2000 BC. He's the ancestor of the Edomites. So we'll see that in a second. Famous for losing his birthright and blessing to Jacob. Okay, so what's the etymology of the name? Anytime you see that, there's always a reason. It says, so his name was Esau. Well, why was his name Esau? The meaning of Esau is unknown. It is part of a sound play with his hairy nature. So it's not that Esau means hairy, it's a sound play. So the word in Hebrew would be sa'er. So she names him Esau, which is a word play on sa'er. So if you spoke Hebrew and you were living in that day and you heard that, you might chuckle. It's like, oh, he's hairy. So she names him a name that sounds like the kind of like in a lot of the Hebrew, when we look at the English translations of a lot of Hebrew passages, this happens a lot in Proverbs and the Psalms, for example. There's aspects of it that we miss because we don't speak that original language. Because which is it, Psalm 119? That's so long, and I think it's Psalm 119. I could be mistaken. Where in Hebrew, every first letter of each verse, it's the Hebrew alphabet. So it's an alliteration of the alphabet. I think it's Psalm 119. I could be wrong. Psalm 139 or Psalm 119. And so anyway, that's something that would be lost on us, because if you go to translate that into English, well, it's no longer that way. But if the first letter of every verse was A, B, C, we'd see it, but we don't see it. And there's a lot of examples in the Old Testament where things are word plays, rhymes, alliteration in Hebrew, right? Like Psalm 119. Excellent. Thank you. And so this is a kind of example of that. You know, sometimes we can spend academically inclined preachers like myself can sometimes spend too much time messing with the original language. I try not to do that. Psalm 34. Okay. And but there's some really interesting things where in the Hebrew, it's like the beauty. So when you translate those things, sometimes it's lost. So it's good to just have an idea. So anyway, Esau was hairy when he was born. The word is Sa'ir or Sa'ur, I think. I'm not positive how best to pronounce that. But you know what? We can find out right now. Here you go.
شعار
Sho'ar. That's how you'd say that in Hebrew. He's hairy.
شعار
All right. I love Hebrew. Okay. So let's get back to the Lexham Bible Dictionary, which is.
Can you explain the two nations?
Yes. Excellent. So in fact, the text will, as we go through, the text is going to do it. So let's see, here we go. So the meaning of Esau is hairy. Okay. It is also a sound play on the word which became the territory of his descendants. So also it's a sound play on the word Se'er, Sho'er, which became the territory of his descendants. And Esau's red, interestingly enough, red in Hebrew is Edom. What does that sound a lot like? Adam. Okay, part of the reason that Adam's name is Adam is because he was made from the red clay of the earth. So there is a direct linguistic connection between Adam and Edom, which means red, and the word red comes from red clay. And so Adam was made from the earth, Adam. So his very name linguistically points us to the fact that he was made from the earth, from the clay of the earth.
Relate to the Indians being called red.
Well, that's a good question. I don't have any biblical connection, but I find that interesting. I don't know. I'll tell you. Okay, here's a footnote to a footnote to a footnote since you asked. I often wonder sometimes if the Garden of Eden was actually in the Western Hemisphere, not the East. Who knows? Maybe they're more direct descendants of Adam than we know. But that's pure speculation. Okay, go ahead.
The thing with the Native Americans, it could just be that settlers weren't exactly the kindest to them. And they just gave them a nickname that was too
Spoken like a man of your generation. Absolutely. Paying attention, being culturally sensitive. So yeah, maybe, because I don't know, are natives even actually reddish? I mean, in fact, a lot of native people, right, and exposed to the sunlight, maybe there was, yeah, it might have just been purely a moniker more than anything properly descriptive. Okay. I know that's what I think too. Gave him the alternative name Edom. Let's see, another sound play. This name is used in Genesis. So the name Esau is unknown outside of the Bible. So there's no record of him outside of the Bible. But anyway, so he was hairy, and so it was a word play, and that's that. Okay, so let's get back to the text. After this, his brother came out. So Esau comes out first. She names him Esau because of a word play, because it says his body was like a hairy garment. That's awesome that the Bible describes it that way. I love that. After this, his brother came out with his hand grasping Esau's heel. So he was named Jacob, which literally means usurper or betrayer. But it doesn't literally mean that. It literally means that based on a euphemistic phraseology of the name Jacob, which literally means heel grabber, because someone who would grab your heel on the way out. So it's like, I'm not positive if that which came first, the fact that he was named that or the phrase, but his betrayer, because he was on the way out, he's like, you're not going out first. I'm coming out first. It's my birthright. And then we see in the text that then these two of these had the most absurd sibling rivalry ever described in the history of humanity, where these two are trying to fight for the birthright. So Jacob means heel grabber, and we're starting to get to the answer of that question, Ted, where God has told her these two are going to be the father of two nations, and I think it bears noting this is so much in antiquity that when, let's say, the son of a influential, powerful man was born, culturally, they knew that this person was probably going to be someone who himself would gain prominence and be the father of a tribe in those days. So he took Esau's heel. Oh, here's some good commentary from James Vernon McGee. Isaac and Rebekah had been married for about 20 years before the children were born. The older one was Esau, and they called him Red, if you please. Jacob took hold of Esau's heel, so they called him Jacob, which means usurper, because he was trying to become the elder or take his place. But God had already promised that to him. Another interesting note, Jacob is always fighting to gain the birthright, even though, unbeknownst to him, the Lord already has planned that he would. We should learn better to rest in the provision of God. So verse 27, the boys grew up, and Esau became a skillful hunter, a man of the open country, while Jacob was a quiet man staying at home among the tents. Isaac, who had a taste for wild game, loved Esau, but Rebekah loved Jacob. That's fascinating, right? Firstborn. So he loved his firstborn, and she loved the baby, the one that, even though they're twins, I mean, they're born minutes, seconds apart, but that's how it went. Okay, so let's take a quick look at this, and then all next week we're going to focus on that, how that developed, the conflict between the two. Observe among other things how long it took him to have his first son. It took a long time. He wasn't even married for 40 years. In what ways do you see the faith of Abraham passed on to Isaac in verses 19 through 26? So perhaps we should wrap it up and come back to that because it's noon. Huh? All right, you're going to take, okay, good. So let's talk about that. I don't know. Let's see. In what ways do you see the faith of Abraham passed on to Isaac in verses 19 through 26? So let's see. Oh, well, okay. So Isaac prayed to the Lord on behalf of his wife. So remember, we're talking about Isaac now. He's the new patriarch of what would become Israel. The babies were jostling. The time came for her to give birth. Well, let's see. If you have any thoughts on that, or any other thing that we've read about, let's just do that. We'll wrap it up with a little discussion. In what ways do you see the faith of Abraham passed on to Isaac in verses 19 through 26? That is a difficult question for me to think of a way to clearly answer it. Observe, among other things, how long it takes Isaac to have his first son. Any thoughts?
Good session.
Amen. Maybe you're welcome. Maybe we'll wrap it up with that. We'll come back to that. And then look, we're going to look at next week how conflict sets the stage for the story of Isaac. And we're going to talk entirely, we're going to focus on, you can take that and look ahead with you if you want to. We're going to look entirely on this relationship between Jacob and Esau and spend some time going through how that developed and how Jacob becomes the father of Israel. Amen.
Maybe a Jewish rabbi can answer.
Might be able to. The only trouble is I got to find a Messianic Jewish rabbi so he does it in a way that still points us to Jesus. No, you can take them with you or leave them here and then I'll have them here next week. It's entirely up to you. All right. Well, thanks everybody for tuning in. I hope that was a blessing for you today. And
It was.
Amen. And thanks for tuning in all the way from Aruba. Bruce, I can't believe you turned your camera off. I want to see Aruba.
Have fun.
It looks a lot like Southwest Florida.
I bet. Oh boy. God bless you guys. I'm gonna go ahead and end this recording and